Tom Loeffler in front of us, social distancing. I would love to stop social distancing and just have a beer and enjoy the great fight with you, Tom. But we live in a strange times. We're gonna come to that a little bit later. First of all, how are you feeling? How is everything in the boxing world?
I feel good. We've been managing to avoid this virus so far. A lot of people, with the pandemic, a lot of people have to take it seriously. In LA, it's shut down. Still pretty much shut down. They just opened the beaches maybe about 10 days ago. I think it's important for people to get outside, get some fresh air, get some sunshine. At the same time, to be careful. Naturally, we'd all like to see sporting events starting again. UFC, Dana White already did 3 shows. NASCAR, did their race. We had that golf tournament, that charity golf tournament already. So it looks like things are slowly starting to open up. And I'm just trying to make the best of the situation now. There's a lot of things that I can always catch up on. Over the years that I've been so busy, traveling and everything. This kind of gives you a break to focus on things, reevaluate things. I'm just kind of organizing quite a bit at home, at the office, and and see what the future holds. Under everyone says the new normal, but I don't think anyone really knows what the new normal is going to be.
No doubt, especially in boxing. You mentioned Dana White with this great ideas. First, it was the Fight Island. Nobody knows what it is for the foreign fighters. Now we know that. Now, last Friday, the U.S. will open their borders for the professional athletes, which is a breakthrough for also boxing, for many other disciplines, obviously, but also for boxing. But from I am reading, and I'm going to just ask the question and listen to your answer. There's so much risk doing anything in boxing. I read Bob Arum saying the bubble MGM Grand, you have to eat only in the same restaurant, don't meet anyone. What's the biggest problem as you being in boxing so many years for boxing right now to be back?
Well, there's a lot of new protocols. Safety is first. Safety is always the concern, especially in a sport like boxing. And then now with the new corona virus and the testing for the virus, it adds a whole other level to safety. My understanding is anyone that's going to compete, whether it's the athletes, the teams, actually the trainers, the officials, anyone inside the arena has to be tested for COVID-19. And then not only do they be tested, but they also have to be quarantined to make sure they don't go outside and then after the test somehow get exposed. I heard a story, and you might know better than me because you follow the soccer probably closer than I do, but I heard in Bundesliga there was one trainer that was giving an interview before the match and said something about it. Someone asked him about the quarantine in the hotel, and then he said he didn't have a toothpaste, so he went outside to the store to get toothpaste, and then he was disqualified from being there at the match. So, that's anyone that gets tested, I think, will have to have a wristband showing that they pass the test, and then also need to be under control, quarantined, throughout the whole process, whether you go to the weigh-in, all the medical checks, the other medical checks besides the COVID testing, and then, leading into fight night. Not only, we had a call with the California Athletic Commission, also about 10 days ago, and, they were talking about everyone from the commission, all the production people, because this is naturally going to be under the scenario of no fans, just producing the fights to be televised worldwide. So all the production people, anyone basically that's going to be inside the arena needs to have a wristband to get inside.
There is, we love great sports, but with great sports come a lot of expenses, a lot of money being paid to the fighters. Now, first of all, without the fans, this is first part. I mean, as a promoter, as a manager, anyone who is in boxing understands this. The sizable amount of money which normally will land in your pocket on any promoter or manager, it's not there. How you, if you discuss with fighters this, if you had this conversation, did you say, okay, John, Steve, whatever. I mean, normally I will make X amount of money. Now, obviously, I am making whatever 1/3 of it. how can we make the big events without fans? Doable, not doable? Opinion?
Well, there's a few aspects there, Peter. I think it goes from the very big events. You know, when we did the Vladimir Klitschko versus Joshua fight, 90,000 people in front of Wembley Stadium. You know, naturally, the live ticket sales and the gate is a huge part of that. You know, Canelo Triple G fights. We set the record, I believe it was the third highest gate ever for boxing for those fights. And, you know, those are the type of fights where that's a huge component of the huge financial component of the compensation. So I don't know how realistic it is. You know, some people were talking about the trilogy fight. So, you know, right now, I think people are just trying to see how far you know, it can go as far as actually having the live sporting events, the live boxing, and then you know, getting back into having an audience. But the priority now is just to have the events. But it's not only going to hurt the biggest events, it's also hurting the small events, you know, the local club shows. You've been to the Hollywood Fight Nights that we do. That's, you know, entirely dependent on ticket sales. You know, there's a lot of local promoters here in the LA area that aren't going to be able to really function under those guidelines unless you know, there's a large television platform fee. You know, whether it's ESPN, whether it's DAZN, you know, Fox, Showtime, whatever the platform would be, that's going to carry the boxing fights. So I think you're not going to see the biggest fights, and you're not going to see the smallest fights. You're going to kind of see that mid-level where. Yeah, and to kind of get back to your question, the fighters are going to have to accept, you know, if there's a less of a big financial pot or a smaller financial pot, I should say, then that is going to be factored into the purses of the fighters as well.
I'm going to go back to Bob Arum, not only because he's been in boxing so long, but sure, he's very vocal about it. One of his quote, I'm going to paraphrase it, but it was like, I'm going to ask the fighter, said, I'm going to pay you this and this amount of money. If you don't like it, they're going to be next in line. You probably read this. So basically, take it or leave it. This is the situation that the fighters will have to deal with for I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 6 months.
Well, Bob has a lot of great quotes and a lot of great stories. You know, over the years that he's been involved in boxing, I've you know, known him for numbers of years and done a number of fights with them together. And I think that's a realistic. I think there's so many fighters now just chomping at the bit to get an opportunity that if someone prices themselves out, you know, whether it's boxing or, you know, any sport, I'm sure the NFL, you know, when you think about these huge football stadiums, you know, 50, 60, 80,000 people, same thing with the Bundesliga, like you had referenced. You know, the soccer in Europe is, you know, it's huge with the fan support, the revenue. You have the end zones with the two, you know, the fan bases and everything like that. And not only boxing, but I think every sport, you know, kind of has it, has to have it factored in. I think boxing is a little more flexible because it's kind of like a fight by fight situation. And I think Bob's right that. If there's an offer made and if a fighter doesn't accept it, then he'll probably go to the next fighter that might be hungrier and then might want to have that fight.
There is a big misconception about when I'm doing those vlogs and even talk to the casual fans. Fans are saying, "Oh, those guys are millionaires. They can easily, you know, survive 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 months, even a year without fighting." And I am explaining to them that I don't know if 3% of the fighters who are actually fighting are getting millions of dollars. Most of them are making $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, $45,000 to $50,000, and I feel bad for those guys.
You're right, Peter. It's a very, very small percentage. You know, whether it's Triple G or Canelo or, you know, Anthony Joshua, whatever it is. I mean, there's a very small percentage of fighters who have accumulated enough, whether it's you know, they don't need to live on a monthly basis or however it is from their boxing income, and you have that mid-level to lower level, and really like probably 97% is probably a pretty good number that fighters really depend on the income, and so I think it is a function of fighters, just wanting to get back in the ring. I mean, you can take Cecilia Brækhus, for example. She was training up in Big Bear. Before all this started, she was scheduled to fight Jessica McCaskill, actually from your city, from Chicago, defending her titles. And instead of flying back during this pandemic back to Norway, she decided to stay there the whole time. So she's anxious to get back into the ring and defend her titles. And I think there's a lot of fighters in a similar position that are anxious just to be willing to compete. And we saw a lot of inflated purses recently with the influx, the competition between DAZN and ESPN, and as I mentioned before, Fox and Showtime. That I don't know. The UFC did well. Dana White did extremely well with the with that pay-per-view that they did, and then with the other two shows on the ESPN ratings. Because I think the sports fans, were starved for content, but he put on great shows. It was a strange, really kind of a surreal atmosphere, not having fans in the ring or in the arena. And I think you're going to see that, as soon as we see a big soccer game, as soon as we see, nobody knows how it's going to be with an NBA game, where there's going to be there's not going to be any fans in the arena. So even football, when you're talking about the Super Bowl, for example, arguably one of the biggest sporting events in the world, not having fans, it's definitely going to change the dynamic, not only financially, but I think also from a competition standpoint, because some fighters, if you fight in Madison Square Garden and it's a packed
Yeah.
house and it's loud, and then a lot of fighters get nervous, or a lot of athletes get nervous like that, and I would imagine it translates across the board. If you're playing in a big football stadium, you're playing at the opposing stadium, and the fans are chanting, or in soccer, same type of thing. And so it's going to be this year, and hopefully it's just this year, and nobody really knows how long this is going to go. But this year is going to be very interesting, the dynamic, not only financially, but from a fan input into the game itself. You remember the famous interactions like Spike Lee at Madison Square Garden to the Knicks game, and the players actually are talking to him, or the opposing team, and vice versa, and or Drake, up there at the Toronto Raptors, and those type of interactions aren't going to be there.
There could be a small kind of paradox, because some fighters are blocked by the fans. I mean, right now, basically, wherever you fight, it doesn't matter. You can fight in Ohio, and it's Crawford versus anyone, and you could actually think that you are fighting at your backyard, because there are no fans, there are no people not throwing bottles, maybe too much, but people are not saying bad things about you when you're walking through to the ring, when there's a ring walk. Maybe for some fighters it's gonna be better, but not for fans. You mentioned Bundesliga. I was just watching versus Bayern, and there's artificial sound, and Bundesliga decided to do artificial sound with fans as is something which adds to the experience of the game. Would you be for something like this in boxing?
That's a good question. I didn't hear about the artificial sound. I guess they'd have to have the drum beats and everything like that. But it was very quiet. It was very quiet at the UFC fights, and I can only imagine it's going to be similar to that. I don't know. I don't know if artificial sound is going to enhance the atmosphere or not. I think that would be kind of a case by case. To me, it sounds artificial. It's probably better just to have no sound than some type of manufactured sound. But we'll have to see how that evolves with the technology today. They even have video screens with the pictures of fans. Just like the Skype call, pictures of fans in the seats. But I don't know. It's hard to say. I probably would be against the artificial sound, because then it's just not something that would be naturally occurring.
You mentioned about interest in boxing. I'm going to just go through a couple of names. Mike Tyson, Evander Holyfield, even Oliver McCall, who you know very well through various, contacts. Shannon Briggs. I can probably go longer and longer. Andrew Golada said he's not going to come back for any money in the world. I mean, you see those numbers. I guess some of them are obviously artificial because I don't see bare knuckle boxing paying $30 million for Mike Tyson fight. We're talking about, it's Tuesday. I am reading some stuff. Tyson Fury accepted the fight versus original Tyson, which is Mike Tyson. First of all, your opinion about guys who have total of 10 years, which is Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield fighting the third fight. Make sense? You would like to see it?
Well, I was at both of the original Holyfield and Mike Tyson fights, and I think there's going to be interest there. It certainly won't be as competitive as when they were both in their primes or, at the time that they fought. But certainly two of the biggest names in the sport of boxing. I think there's interest. I think it depends on how starved the sports community is, the boxing community is to tune in. If they're going to put it on pay-per-view, it's a pretty easy economic equation. If they get a certain percentage of the pay-per-view revenue and it does great on pay-per-view, then they'll make a lot of money. If for some reason it falls flat on its face and people don't want to see 50-year-old guys fighting, then it won't do so well. I think when those type of athletes start asking for huge guarantees, that's when it starts becoming a challenge. So would I want to see it fight? Like I said, I think that would be two big names. I wouldn't be against it. Put it that way. I wouldn't be against them fighting. But I think they also there's a lot that goes into it. Shannon Briggs always was chasing around Vladimir Klitschko. I remember. I mean, you've seen all the famous videos. So I've heard that brought up before. And Vladimir, I've seen him. Actually, the last time I was on an airplane was when I flew out to Miami, and I saw Vladimir out there in Miami. That was the end of February, beginning of March, right before everything shut down. And Vladimir's in tremendous shape, so I know a lot of people would love to see Vladimir come back and compete. So any one of those top names like that, I think could be an attraction. It just depends on the proof is in the pudding. The proof is in you can't sell tickets for it, so the proof is like how many people are actually going to tune in to watch it if it's on a streaming service, or how many people are going to pay to see it if it's on pay-per-view.
From all those guys which said publicly we want to come back. You mentioned Vladimir. I want to ask him about it. I didn't want to ask you about it or not because you're going to say me like Peter, forget it. But I remember our conversation saying it was before first Tyson Fury. We were in Los Angeles on one of your shows. Okay. It was first Tyson Fury Wilder, and I asked you, Tom, imagine Vlad is coming back. Will he beat both of them? And you didn't even flinch. You said, no doubt. Remember?
I really believe so. You got to give a lot of respect to Tyson Fury, what he's accomplished. Beating Vladimir in Germany was a huge feat for him because back then Vladimir was really unbeatable, especially in Germany. And we saw even after that, 2 years after that, him fighting Joshua in Wembley Stadium and almost having Joshua out before AJ came back and won in the 11th round. But I always thought it'd be a great fight with Deontay Wilder and Vladimir Klitschko, two of the biggest punchers in the sport of boxing. Deontay was in a couple of the training camps as a sparring partner or training partner with Vladimir. Emanuel Stewart. You got to give Emanuel a lot of credit. Rest in peace. That he brought in the top guys to spar with Vladimir. I remember we had 10 guys, 12 guys at a time for each training camp, and whether it was Deontay Wilder or Joseph Parker or Joshua was out there. All the top guys that have now become champions. Tyson Fury was actually in camp also. He was kind of under Emanuel's wing, so Tyson never sparred with Vladimir, but he was up there to kind of experience a world champion atmosphere with a training camp. So, I personally, I mean, I'm a fan of Vladimir's. I would love to see him fight, but he stays in great shape. I told Vlad I would support him either way if he decided not to fight. He's accomplished so much in boxing. There's nothing that Vladimir needs to prove. He's an Olympic champion. He's one of the longest reigning heavyweight champions ever. I think if you add up all of his reign, he's actually the longest reigning heavyweight champion. So he has nothing to prove. If he wanted to come back, I think he'd still be extremely successful against these guys. Tyson Fury has proven, with his last performance against Deontay Wilder, I really think Fury is right up there at the top of the sport. Joshua avenging his loss to Andy Ruiz. The thing with AJ now is going to be, was that a fluke the first time? Or, how did that whole thing go? So, I'm sure he's got to build up his confidence now. But Vladimir's not afraid of any of those guys. And I know with Fury, he always kind of wanted to get a revenge to get his titles back with Tyson Fury. So I wouldn't count him out against any of those guys if he ever decided to return to boxing.
So from those guys, this is the last question because I love the train of thought when it comes to the Vladimir, your train of thought. Because some of those guys who are older gentlemen or middle-aged gentlemen, Evander Holyfield less, but Mike Tyson said, I can take anyone. I mean, I don't think Mike Tyson can take on top 50 in heavyweight boxing. My opinion, I could be absolutely wrong. For me, 5 seconds versus pads. Pads are not, hitting back. It's completely different than actually being in a fight. Spoke with many fighters, but those names I mentioned. So I agree with you 100%. And you said, I never said this for public, but I think that if any of those former champions could come right now and compete versus the actual top 10, Wladimir Klitschko will be the only one which I will start thinking maybe he can do it. You agree?
I agree. Look, I'm one of the biggest Tyson. I'm one of the biggest Tyson fans.
Tyson.
I grew up watching Mike Tyson. Yeah,
Yeah.
he was 20 years old, and he was on the cover of Sports Illustrated, the youngest heavyweight champion ever. And I'm a huge Mike Tyson fan. And when he was knocking guys out in the first round, second round, there was nobody more intimidating or devastating at the time. But then we saw. We were working on a fight with Vitaly Klitschko against Tyson at that time, and when Tyson lost to Danny Williams, if you remember, then instead of fighting Mike Tyson, then Vitaly fought Danny Williams at Mandalay Bay. And so, if Mike at that time wasn't able to beat those guys, I'm not sure how he would be competitive now. Certainly, he'd probably still be intimidating to a certain point. But, when you're talking about a 12-round fight, the conditioning, everything like that, I just don't see it being realistic at the top level. I agree with you that Vladimir, out of all the guys that you had mentioned, would be the only one that, could win or be competitive at that top 10 level if he decided to fight.
And traditionally, it was previous question was my last, but it wasn't. This is the last. What you playing? What you planning for the? I know it's hard to plan anything right now. We're living in times, and tomorrow we have the option to do it. What would you like to do it with the fighters you have, and what fights you would like to see first?
You broke up a little bit there, but with the fighters, look, Sorey Boachuk is 17-0 with 17 knockouts. I think he could fight anyone in that junior middleweight division. Cecilia Brækhus, I think she has 3 Guinness Book of World Records. I really think that she's accomplished the most in women's boxing. If she makes one more title defense, then she would have 26 title defenses, which is staggering. I think it would actually set the record in boxing history. So, her against McCaskill, if she beats McCaskill, and then the winner of Kitty Taylor and Amanda Serrano, that would be a huge fight. Triple G, still, I think, one of the most exciting fighters with his knockout power. I still believe, and to this day, I don't think he ever lost a fight in his life. I don't think the first fight with Canelo was a draw. and I don't think he lost the second fight. So Triple G against anyone is always an exciting fight. Um, then some of the younger guys, Brian Ceballos is an exciting fighter. When you go back to selling tickets, that was always an important factor in a young fighter's career. You look at what Ryan Garcia is doing, big on social media, selling tickets out here on the West Coast. And Brian Ceballos was right there, when he fought at Madison Square Garden on the undercard of the Triple G fights. He sold the most tickets of any of the undercard fighters. So, he was right there. And you take away that ticket selling component, at least in the next short, time frame, that's a big part of a young fighter rising up. So I think there's even more pressure now for fighters to be exciting in the ring and to put on a show for people to tune in, as there was before. So those are the plans right now, and we'll see how everything develops, and hopefully we get back past this pandemic to a point where we get back to live audiences and world championship fights.
Thank you very much. For many years, always a great interview with you, Tom. And you brought something. This is not the question. It's just that I knew a lot of stuff. I completely forgot about this Vitaly Klitschko versus Mike Tyson possible fight. I completely forgot about that. Always learn something from Tom. Maybe we're gonna go back in the next chapter of our conversations about the old times and Vitaly Klitschko, who for my money is one of the best fighters and toughest fighters I ever saw in the ring, and I'm doing this 35 years. Tom, thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter. And I agree with you on Vitaly, by the way, with that gash that he had against Lennox Lewis, and he didn't want the referee to stop the fight, the doctor to stop the fight. But Vitaly, him against anyone. He told me once, and just as a last story, that he was growing up on a lot of military bases, and one time he was surrounded by like 20 boys that were kind of trying to test him. So he told me, like, if he's in the ring with only one guy, there's nothing to be afraid of. And I believe him on that. And he's probably the toughest mayor in the whole world right now, the mayor of Kiev.
Thank you very much again, our guest, Tom Loeffler.